And I'm going to now turn things over to Ernie Tannis, and I'm sure many of you will probably know of Ernie's work through REACH Canada, and he's going to talk about rights and responsibilities as they are related to housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pamela. Yes, last but not least, Ernie Tannis is going to speak to us. Ernie is a solicitor and mediator in Ottawa, and for those of you who didn't hear this, just in this past week, he was inscribed as the United Way Community Builder Award recipient at City Hall. Congratulations, Ernie. Ernie is a co-founder of REACH Canada, established in 1981 for equality of justice for persons with disabilities. He has written 2 books about alternative dispute resolution and problem solving. Ernie?
Hello. Quite a few speakers. Is Richard here your second speaker? He said the best speaker is for last, but the reason is the best speaker is the last speaker. That's why everybody's happy. Listen, this is not for show. I'm actually temporarily disabled now. I have a inflammatory arthritis on my right foot. I haven't been able to sleep for 8 days. I had, on your same level, I have a sense, after 30 years in the disability field, even a little bit glimpse more of the problems and obstacles and challenges everyone faces. So I'm empathetic. I'm going to write about it. I remember when REACH got started in 1981. In the first meeting I went to help set up REACH, inspired by Rod Carpenter, you may know, I was in a room with 30 or 40 people, all of whom had some form of disability, and they said, here comes the tab. Now, I don't know if you remember, but tab was a soft drink. I didn't know I looked like a soft drink, but I didn't know tab meant temporarily able-bodied. And I got humbled by that fact. And I'd like to say about REACH, Paula Gulnick, can you stand up? Paula's here from REACH, the executive director. Thank you, Paula, for being here. The REACH organization has inspired me to follow this path on disability issues. So I'm glad to get this more insight. I know we're supposed to stop at 4 and it's 7 minutes after 4, so can I take 7 minutes then? Because if I can keep your attention for 7 minutes. I'll try to do this in a kind of overview way. I'm a solicitor and a mediator, so I just want to ask to get a sense of resolution. How many in this room have never had a conflict with a government, an agency, a supplier, a landlord, a family member, or a neighbor? Okay, so, one person, okay, you should give the speech later. So, part of the thrust of this is how do you do problem solving? How many here, so I can understand, how many here are afraid to make a complaint because you think you might not get the same service? Anybody here afraid to make a complaint? Anybody here afraid to say you're afraid to make a complaint? So the whole idea of access to justice is just us. So we have to work together. On a telescope view of this field, I just want to say something that might be an illuminating glimpse into the obvious. But although what the statistics are from the UN and the Ontario government that 15% of the population is disabled at any one time, the projections are that that is going to go up to 20%. When you think of temporarily disabled persons like myself, the statistic goes up to 20 to 25%. But if you add in all of the relatives, all of the friends, all of the neighbors, all those beyond, the disabled community represents a political constituency of 50% of the population. This is a powerful constituency that we need to be self-aware of in terms of moving things forward. Also, what's really important historically is to understand, to give credit to the confidence of this kind of constituency. In my new book on problem solving, I have a chapter called Perseverance. It's dedicated to the mediations I've done with disabled persons. Perseverance. And this field, in fact, has generated more advances in technology than any other field. Anything that's good for that constituency is good for society. These are important elements to understand the collective need of access to justice for the field of disability. That's on the telescope level. On the legislative level, as Pam said, we handed out a list. I took 5 hours on Friday to check out my side of the list, which is a series of references and phone numbers that I felt if I'm sitting in my couch and I can't go upstairs and I can't go downstairs, I'm working off my BlackBerry, thank goodness for Blackberries, and I said, where do I go for help? I'm sitting here, where do I go? who do I call? Well, first thing I do is call Reach Canada, of course. But you know, there's so many resources. I was concerned about how do people in this area understand their rights, responsibilities, and access to justice in terms of all the legal aspects of this field. And it struck me after doing this, there should be just a dedicated seminar just on this. But there's some phenomenal information in here. And just to show how compelling, how forward-looking, how inspiring this is, the Law Reform Commission of Ontario, I just discovered in my research, just issued on March 25th, for 21st of this week, the same day I was at City Hall, it's a coincidence, they issued a challenge to everyone to how do we improve access to justice for people with disabilities in this province. This is the newest initiative by the Law Reform Commission of Canada, just to show how contemporary and valuable this day is, which is terrific. The organizers had a great time. There is the Ontario Human Rights Commission in terms of accommodation. I want to touch on a couple of cases I'm involved in, so I don't just talk just generally. What's happening on the ground? I had a case where a couple moved into an apartment building. They were fully able-bodied, then he became disabled. So he asked the landlord to improve the accommodation, not only to the apartment, but to the lobby. It would have cost $100,000. It's an older apartment building. So the landlord and the property manager were having some trouble. Then the disabled person hired the Tenancy Advocacy Association in Toronto and filed a complaint with the Human Rights Commission. They called me in as a consultant. And I realized that there was all these kind of balances, as Pam was talking about, and how do you balance all this stuff out? This is going to happen more and more and more in terms of accommodation. So they came out with a kind of a compromise in terms of, he wanted compensation, but in terms of what they can do in his apartment, something that can be done in the lobby for the benefit of the whole building, which the landlord then can add to the rents for the whole building. This is just like, this only happened in the last few months. The property manager said, well, what are we going to do with this? When Reach had a conference last year, we had a human rights person from Toronto, and I said, you know, the Human Rights the Human Rights Tribunal is going to be deluged with this. Because as you may know, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disability Act came into force in 2005. The 2001 statute was a statement that all of Ontario has to be accessible. The 2005 statute, as you probably know, is going to require every public and private institution in Ontario to be fully accessible from top to bottom by the year 2025. This year started the customer service. Everyone has to be customer service. I have a brother-in-law who's in a wheelchair. He can't pump his own gas, stuff we take for granted. Well, what are we going to do about that? It's the same kind of issue. So I'm working with Dave Brown, and we're going to try to get gas companies to make sure there's someone at certain gas stations to pump gas for people with disabled persons. That's going to be a requirement. Thank you, my brother. And I just want to give like the examples that I see every day. This statute does not yet require private developers or builders to accommodate people in condominiums or in apartment buildings or in townhouses yet. That's not going to come into the next stage, and it's only going to apply to new buildings. So it seems to me now that the Human Rights Tribunal is going to be very, very busy, and they have a mediation program. So there's going to have to be this kind of accommodation, and just so you understand the way this works is you can't ask a landlord to bankrupt himself or a builder. So what they'll do is subject to undue hardship. So if it's too economically burdensome, then the developer doesn't have to do it. But it's all going to be a negotiation. Everything is a negotiation, right? You negotiate with your spouse and your siblings and your children and your neighbors. This whole field of disability is going to become a negotiation. One of the Reach projects that we're hoping to become permanent is called Equality in Practice. It's a national website on access to justice for people with disabilities across the country, so you can tap into local resources. As Pam said, one of the cases we were co-mediating on a woman who's trying to get help at home is that sometimes a case becomes a cause. Because I discovered, as we discovered, that the Health Services and Review Board, an agency had a big law firm represented, but the disabled person was not represented. The Ontario government has legal aid in many, many areas in duty council. So one of the projects is to make sure that nowhere in this province is a disabled person not represented by a lawyer. It's an imbalance of power. These are the kinds of things that are emerging from the cases what we're doing. And you can be sure that REACH is going to be working on that. The Landlord and Tenant Board is a place people can go to. Tenants Advocacy. There's a tremendous Accessibility for Ontario's Disability Act website by an NGO. It's all there in terms of looking for your legal rights and responsibilities. One of the things I'm involved a lot in is an alternative dispute resolution and mediation. I want to touch on the negotiation processes that we have to be involved in to have human and economic justice, not just legal, human and economic justice for people with disabilities. Now, and when I started out as a lawyer, I'll get to take one more minute, there was that was 36 years ago, hard to believe. But there was a picture, I saw a famous picture of a cow. And one farmer was fighting, pulling the head, and the other farmer was fighting, pulling the tail. And right in the middle, there were two lawyers milking the cow. So, litigation, confrontation, win-lose is not the way to go in the disability field. It's going to have to be mediation, negotiation, and it's got to be win-win. So in the vision for this area, I don't want you to forget the soft stuff. Everything else, I have learned so much today. I'm so glad I was invited. The knowledge, the power, the collective intelligence, and the leadership of this constituency is yet to be fully understood. But please don't forget there's this other piece. It's like a plug in a socket. It's electrifying. And I've been electrified today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ernie.